So, freeways were envisioned by mid century planners as a way of redeveloping cities and through a process that's often described as urban renewal, that essentially became an excuse to remove neighborhoods with disadvantaged communities and replace them with new development of transportation infrastructure, sometimes civic spaces, and new buildings that these planners like Robert Moses hoped would revitalize urban areas. The approach, however, to building these freeways in these dense places that were inhabited by lots and lots of people was to really wreak havoc with a lot of communities, and in particular with socially and economically disadvantaged communities. And so there was a tremendous amount of opposition that eventually emerged within the cities of New York, and then also in cities like San Francisco. There was tremendous grassroots opposition to the development of further urban freeways. So here's a demonstration against the Lower Manhattan Expressway. You can see in the diagram that this was envisioned to cut right across Lower Manhattan through Greenwich Village and remove blocks and blocks of Lower Manhattan and replace not only with this expressway, but also with new buildings that reflected a more modern architecture than the row houses and fairly compact built environment of Lower Manhattan. And a journalist who was originally an architecture reporter named Jane Jacobs ended up writing a fair amount about the effect of this urban renewal and the development of freeways and also just clearance of large parts of the city that displaced a lot of people. And she ended up, without having any formal background in planning, being one of the most influential writers in urban planning in the 20th century. One of the things that Jane Jacobs recognized was how, in the seeming disorder of these older cities that were, a patchwork of land uses with fairly narrow streets and a very walkable layout, this is the environment, the disorder that figures like Robert Moses were really championing the destruction of because they saw it as outdated and overcrowded, etc. Jane Jacobs instead recognized that these places were really vibrant in terms of their community and their sense of culture and their human scale, the interactions between pedestrians and shop owners, and what she called eyes on the street that would create safe and human urban places. And so Jane Jacobs became a central figurehead in opposition towards freeway development and other urban renewal within New York. And opposition to freeways spread to many other American cities as well. One of the issues that the history of freeway opposition in Washington, D.C. points out is who has the means, who has the sort of leverage, the voice to oppose freeways and who may not. Washington, D.C. saw a lot of opposition to freeways in outlying neighborhoods that were predominantly white and affluent. Residents in Tacoma Park, for example, strongly opposed a freeway that was planned to be built through their neighborhood, but plans for redirecting these freeways through predominantly black neighborhoods underscore some major inequities in who has the capacity to fight against a freeway that might have a detrimental impact on one's community. In Washington, D.C., the black community was very vocal in opposition to shifting development of freeways from white neighborhoods into black neighborhoods and underscoring the injustice not only of preferring the destruction of a minority neighborhood over a white neighborhood, but also that white people who lived in outlying areas were more likely to be the beneficiaries of developing a freeway that would connect them with the central city, whereas black residents would not necessarily stand to benefit from infrastructure that was cutting right through their neighborhood. San Francisco has also been a major site of contention around freeway development. The original plans for freeways in the city of San Francisco included freeways that would have cut all the way through the city, connecting 101 on the south end with the Golden Gate Bridge on the north. And some of these freeways have been built, at least partially, but others either were never built, were stubs that ended more in the middle of town, or have since been removed, or have even been remediated in recent years by putting some portions of those freeways underground. Famously, the viaduct that was planned to go along the Embarcadero was actually never built past just a short piece that, of course, went right next to the ferry building. And then following the Loma Prieta earthquake, when that whole structure was considered seismically unsound, that became an opportunity to remove that stub of freeway that was never fully realized. And then more recently, portions of 101 on the approach to the Golden Gate Bridge in the Presidio have actually been put underground, and that reconnects the Presidio that was long disconnected from the shoreline by that freeway. It reconnects them with that shoreline. Another of San Francisco's freeway removal projects, which had to do with removing part of the central freeway after the Loma Prieta earthquake and replacing it with Octavia Boulevard, demonstrates how there are some really divergent approaches that cities have taken to freeway remediation or removal. So one option is to fully remove a freeway, as happened with the Octavia. And the example of Octavia Boulevard suggests that you may be able to move a fair amount of traffic on a surface street that is designed to also accommodate pedestrians and may have a much closer connection with the urban fabric around it than certainly a freeway on a viaduct would. Alternatively, in Seattle, as they have also in Boston, they've chosen to take a surface freeway that has really had a negative impact on the above-ground urban fabric, in the case of Seattle, blocking much of the central business district from the waterfront. And in Boston, Interstate 95 cut the Old North End, which is a historic part of town, off from the rest of the downtown. In those cases, they've chosen to put those freeways underground. And so this allows for a reconnection of the urban fabric at ground level, but it also, of course, leaves the capacity of the freeway in place if those are considered to be really crucial arteries for movement. So a really important question for planners who are considering how we might remediate some of the effects on urban fabric of having urban freeways is to gauge whether those cities really need the capacity of a freeway, the speed of a freeway in the downtown area, or whether they might get a reasonable amount of mobility just from surface streets, which are certainly a lot cheaper than tunneling a freeway underground.